What if the country that invented the American dream is the same one quietly burying it for 36 million of its own people, while overdose deaths finally dip, but only after claiming more lives than every US war combined since World War II? Hey everyone, welcome back to Libo News, where we don't just report the headlines, we flip them upside down to ask the questions the big networks won't touch. Today, we're staring straight into the underbelly of America in 2025, a land where the official poverty rate sits at 10.6%, leaving 36 million folks, about the size of New York, California, and Texas combined, hanging on by a thread thinner than a welfare check. That's straight from the U.S. Census Bureau's latest drop, showing incomes edging up to a median of $83,730, but barely enough to keep the lights on in places where rent's devouring half your paycheck. And drugs? Provisional CDC numbers paint a grim silver lining. Overdose deaths plunged 27% to around 80,000 last year, saving an estimated 81 lives a day. But let's be real, that's still a Vietnam War's worth of tragedy every year, mostly from fentanyl sneaking in like a ghost in the machine. This isn't the triumphant comeback story cable news loves to spin. It's a wake-up call to why the pull-yourself-up myth leaves so many dangling. What if the real epidemic isn't the drugs or the dollars? It's the blind faith in a system that rewards the top while the bottom fights for scraps. Stick with me as we unpack this beast, because the truths we're about to hit could change how you see the stars and stripes. Fast forward to the heart-pounding core of this mess, and it's like watching a slow-motion car crash you can't look away from. Picture the gleaming billboards of Silicon Valley, where tech titans drop $100 million on a single stock play, while just a freeway exit over. Tent cities swell under the weight of evictions that spiked 20% in urban hubs last year. The supplemental poverty measure, that smarter gauge from the census that factors in taxes, benefits, and the soul-crushing bite of medical bills, holds steady at 12.9%, trapping 44 million in a limbo, where one hospital visit or car breakdown flips, making it to making do. We're talking families in Mississippi, where poverty clings to 19% of residents, choosing between insulin shots and school lunches, or New Mexico's rural corners, where 18% stare down empty pantries because gig jobs pay $15 an hour without a safety net. And the drugs? That 27% drop sounds like progress until you zoom in. Fentanyl still laced 70% of those 80,000 fatalities, turning counterfeit pills into roulette wheels in Ohio's Rust Belt towns, where rates hit 72 deaths per 100,000. Emergency rooms aren't healing hubs anymore. They're revolving doors for the same hollow-eyed faces, medics slapping Narcan kits like Band-Aids on bullet wounds. While Wall Street toasted record highs and GDP ticked up, homelessness exploded 18% to 770,000 on a single January night, per HUD's point-in-time count, the sharpest jump since the Great Recession, with California's unsheltered camps hitting 187,000 souls baking under the sun. This crescendo isn't random chaos, it's the ugly symphony of a nation where the top 1%, holding 31% of all wealth, or $49 trillion by Federal Reserve tallies, pulls levers that tighten the noose on everyone else. Black Americans? Poverty at 17%, double the white rate of 8.6%. Native communities? 23%, with overdose spikes 39% in recent years. It's not just stats, it's a powder keg, where desperation meets distribution, and the blast radius spares no one. But hang on a second, what if the wins we're celebrating are just smokescreens for a fire that's still raging underground? Let's pivot here, because before we dissect the guts of this thing, consider this mini mind-bender. In a year when overdose deaths finally bent downward, why did poverty's grip stay ironclad and homelessness surge like it was auditioning for a horror flick? The census says incomes rose slightly, yet 7.5 million got shoved below the line by medical costs alone, whispering that healthcare isn't a right, it's a raffle you lose when you're already broke. And that 770,000 unhoused? Up 18%, but unsheltered rates dipped 4% thanks to frantic shelter scrambles, proving the system's reactive, not preventative. It's the kind of progress that keeps you up at night, wondering if we're fixing symptoms or just papering over the plague. Now, let's roll up our sleeves and carve into the why, the root rot that mainstream pundits gloss over with quick cuts to personal choice or border security. Poverty in America isn't a moral failing, it's the exhaust from an engine tuned for the elite. The Federal Reserve's data screams it. The top 1% commands 31% of the pie, while the bottom 50% scrapes by with 2.6%, a chasm widened by stock surges they can't touch, and tax codes that treat capital gains like holy water. Dig deeper and you see deindustrialization's ghost. 5 million manufacturing jobs vaporized since 2000, gutting places like Detroit's core or Ohio's factory floors, where median wages froze at $75,000 adjusted for inflation, but housing ballooned 30% since the pandemic. Folks aren't lazy, they're trapped in gig hell, driving Ubers for 36% of the workforce, netting $15 an hour sans benefits per BLS. What few spot? This economic vertigo doesn't just empty pockets, it erodes the invisible scaffolding of life. Stable homes, mental health check-ins, community ties that whisper, "You're not alone." Enter the drugs. The war on drugs, that $1 trillion sinkhole since '71, funneled billions to badges over beds, turning addiction into a crime instead of a cry for help. Mainstream blames cartels, but flip the script. What if Purdue Pharma's OxyContin flood in the '90s, prescriptions quadrupling to hook 2 million legally, was the real gateway drug? Fines hit billions, but profits dwarfed them at $35 billion, seeding the fentanyl shift when scripts dried up. Why the blind eye? Because Pharma lobbies $300 million yearly to keep the narrative narrow, ignoring how poverty's perfect storm, job loss, trauma, zero access to the 40% of rehabs gated by insurance, turns neighborhoods into numb zones. Racial threads, they're the noose. Black poverty at 17%, Native at 23%, fueling overdose rates 44% higher for black folks and 39% for natives in recent spikes per CDC. It's not coincidence, it's compounding. Harsher policing in poor zip codes, where a possession bust strips voting rights and jobs, locking cycles tighter than any chain. And the overlooked ripple? Mental health's silent scream. 20% of low-income adults battle severe depression, but only 40% snag care, per SAMHSA. Poverty floods cortisol, shrinking brains primed for escape. ACE studies show childhood traumas in 60% of poor kids triple addiction odds. What if we're not fighting a drug war, but waging one on the vulnerable, where big pharma and policy puppeteers profit off the pain? The fallout from this, now that's the slow bleed no one's counting in prime time, the system-wide hemorrhage that turns personal tragedies into national ghosts. Overdoses alone? They siphoned $1 trillion last year. Healthcare overruns, orphan kids in foster care, 115,000 new entries in, 23 per HHS, and lost wages that could have built small towns. But layer poverty's tab, trillions more in eroded productivity, where chronic absenteeism hits 15% in underfunded schools, per Education Week, churning out dropouts who feed the very underclass the dream despises. Communities don't just fray, they fossilize. Appalachia's life expectancy tanked 2.5 years since 2010, JAMA says, as opioids hollowed main streets, spiking crime 20 to 30% in high-poverty blocks. Families? Shattered mosaics. Black and Native kids in foster systems at double rates, inheriting not silver spoons, but silver shadows of distrust in a justice system that incarcerates 1 in 3 black men for felonies, per Sentencing Project, barring them from ballots and breadwinners' roles. Economically, it's a black hole. $200 billion yearly from untreated addiction, CDC tallies, while wealth gaps, Guinea at 0.41, worst in the G7, starve innovation at the base, where 40% of Gen Z dreams of ditching for fairer lands, per Deloitte. Rural hollows like West Virginia's hollers, 40% opioid use, emptying churches and polls, voter turnout 20% lower than affluent suburbs. Urban cores, Chicago's South Side, 28% poverty breeds 50 homicides a year, cops as occupiers, not guardians. Immigrants? Undocumented families, 5 million US-born kids, skip aid fearing ICE, poverty at 25%. Elders? 10% scraping by, suicides 50% higher on fixed incomes. The uncounted cost? Hope's quiet hemorrhage, a brain drain, frayed social fabric, where deaths of despair claim 70,000 yearly, per Case Deaton, not from bullets or bombs, but from a promise that rang hollow. What if this isn't fallout, but fertilizer for the elite's garden? Private prisons netting $5 billion off minor busts, pharma hawking antidepressants up 20% since 2015, while access lags in the shadows. So here's the gut check wrap. As we barrel toward another election circus and moonshot hype, what if America's true superpower isn't innovation, but this eerie ability to compartmentalize the carnage next door? The dream dangles. Hard work pays, but with wages stagnant, homes $412,000 out of reach for 70% of millennials, and safety nets like SNAP eyeing $30 billion cuts, it's less bootstrap, more boot on the neck. That 27% overdose drop, heroic naloxone pushes and lawsuit cash helped, but without gutting the inequality engine. Taxing the top 1%, S-hoard at fairer rates, universal housing pilots, or mental health as a baseline, not a luxury. It's whack-a-mole with a monster. For whom is this land of opportunity, really? And what's the tab we're all fronting for pretending it's not rigged? Hit the comments. Your story from the trenches, your wild fix for the fix. We're building this conversation brick by unvarnished brick. This is Libo News, chasing the angles that bite back. Stay sharp, stay connected, and remember, the light starts when we stop looking away. See you next time.